The church was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in late December when the world seems to hold its breath before Christmas. Stained glass windows cast soft reds and blues across the pews, where a handful of parishioners knelt, heads bowed, their whispers blending with the faint creak of old wood. Snow dusted the sidewalks outside, clinging to the edges of New York's grey streets, and the air carried that sharp, cold bite that made you pull your coat tighter. Inside, the scent of candle wax and pine from the Advent wreath hung heavy, wrapping the sanctuary in a warmth that felt almost sacred. Father Thomas, a Dominican priest with tired eyes and a gentle smile, stood near the altar, adjusting a stack of hymnals. His black and white cassock was slightly worn at the cuffs, a testament to his years spent walking the halls of the Children's Cancer Ward, where hope was as fragile as the lives he tended. He'd been a pastor there for 2 years, carrying the weight of small hands gripping his, of parents' tearful prayers, of moments that broke and mended his heart all at once. At 45, his face bore lines etched by countless bedside vigils, but his voice remained steady, a quiet anchor for those adrift in grief. Tonight, he was just finishing up in the church, ready to head back to the hospital, when the heavy oak doors swung open. A gust of winter air followed, and with it, the Whitmans, Edward and Lillian, stepping inside like they owned the place, their polished shoes clicking on the stone floor. Edward, a real estate magnate with a fortune built on Manhattan skyscrapers, wore a tailored wool coat, his silver hair catching the candlelight. Lillian, elegant in a fur-trimmed jacket, carried a designer handbag that cost more than Father Thomas's yearly stipend. They were the kind of couple who made headlines for their charity galas, but here, in the dim glow of the church, they seemed almost out of place, like actors stepping onto the wrong stage. The parishioners, Mrs. Callahan, an elderly widow with a rosary clutched tight, and young Daniel, a college student who'd come to light a candle for his sick mother, glanced up, their prayers pausing. The Whitmans weren't strangers. They attended Mass regularly, their donations keeping the church's roof intact. But tonight, their presence felt different, purposeful. Edward's voice boomed, warm but commanding, as he approached Father Thomas. "Father, we've been thinking," he said, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Christmas is coming, and we want to do something special for you. You've given so much to this parish, to the hospital. Name anything you want, anything at all, and it's yours." Lillian nodded, her smile practiced but genuine. "Money's no object, Father. A new car, a vacation, maybe a better apartment? You deserve it." The church seemed to still. Mrs. Callahan's rosary beads stopped clicking. Daniel's candle flickered, casting shadows that danced across his surprised face. Father Thomas looked at the Whitmans, his hands pausing on the hymnals. His expression was calm, unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. A memory, perhaps, of a small voice asking for something impossible. He took a slow breath, the kind you take before saying something that might change everything. "A Cabbage Patch doll," he said simply, "and a pair of walkie-talkies." The words landed like a thunderclap in the silent church. Edward's confident smile froze, his brow furrowing as if he'd misheard. Lillian's perfectly manicured hand tightened on her handbag, her lips parting in shock. "A doll?" she repeated, her voice a mix of disbelief and something close to offense. Mrs. Callahan gasped audibly, her rosary slipping to her lap. Daniel's head snapped up, his mouth open, as if the priest had just asked for a spaceship. A Cabbage Patch doll? In the 1980s? Everyone knew those dolls were impossible to find. Stores across New York had been sold out for weeks, shelves stripped bare by desperate parents willing to pay triple the $75 price tag. The craze had turned toy shops into battlegrounds, with lines stretching around city blocks. Edward let out a short, incredulous laugh, his polished demeanor cracking. "Father, come on," he said, shaking his head. "You could ask for anything, a trip to Rome, a new organ for the church. And you want a doll?" Lillian stepped closer, her voice softer but no less stunned. "Surely you're joking, Father. Those things are, well, they're for children. And they're impossible to get." The parishioners exchanged glances, their whispers rising like a low hum. Mrs. Callahan muttered something about the priest losing his mind, while Daniel leaned forward, waiting for an explanation that might make sense of the madness. Father Thomas didn't flinch. His gaze moved from Edward to Lillian, then briefly to the flickering candles by the altar, as if seeing something far beyond the church walls. "There's a girl," he said, his voice quiet but steady, like a man recounting a sacred memory. 10 years old, from Ireland. She's in the hospital, fighting leukemia. Her name stays with me, always will. She's been asking for a Cabbage Patch doll, the kind with the yarn hair and the little adoption papers. It's all she wants this Christmas. Her name was Siobhan, a name that meant freedom, though she was bound to that bed. The air in the church shifted, heavy with the weight of his words. Edward's laughter died in his throat. Lillian's hand loosened on her bag, her eyes softening. Mrs. Callahan pressed a hand to her chest, her earlier judgment replaced by a flicker of shame. Father Thomas continued, his voice low, carrying the cadence of a man who'd seen too much suffering to speak lightly. She's in isolation now, can't leave her room. Her twin brother visits, but they keep him at a distance to protect her. She's so weak, but she still smiles when she talks about that doll. And the walkie-talkies, they're for her and her brother. It's so they can talk, even when the glass keeps them apart. He paused, his hands folding together, the worn cuffs of his cassock catching the light. It's not about the doll or the radios. It's about giving her a moment of joy, a moment to feel like a child again, not a patient. The Whitmans stood silent, their earlier confidence replaced by something raw, unguarded. Edward cleared his throat, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Father, I didn't know. Lillian reached out, touching her husband's arm, her eyes glistening. We'll find it, she said firmly, as if making a vow. We'll get the doll, the walkie-talkies, whatever it takes. Edward nodded, his jaw tight. It won't be easy, he said, almost to himself. Those dolls are like gold dust right now. People are fighting in stores, paying hundreds. But we'll make it happen. Father Thomas offered a small, grateful smile, the kind that carried years of quiet faith. Thank you, he said simply. It'll mean the world to her. The next morning, the Whitmans were true to their word. Edward called in favors, pulling strings with every contact he had in the city. Lillian scoured toy stores, boutiques, even black market sellers, her elegant heels clicking through Manhattan's crowded streets. By some miracle, or perhaps sheer determination, they found a Cabbage Patch doll, its yarn hair slightly mussed but intact, its adoption papers tucked neatly in the box. The walkie-talkies, sturdy and simple, came from a small electronics shop on the Lower East Side, the last pair in stock. They delivered them to Father Thomas that evening, their faces a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Edward handed over the doll, his hands less steady than usual. This wasn't easy, Father, he said, a hint of awe in his voice. But it feels right. Lillian clutched the walkie-talkies, her eyes bright with unshed tears. For the girl, she whispered. For her brother. Father Thomas took the items gently, as if they were sacred relics. He didn't say much, just nodded, his gratitude unspoken, but heavy in the air. That night, he walked the familiar halls of the hospital, the doll tucked under one arm, the walkie-talkies in a small bag. The children's ward was quiet, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows on the linoleum floor. He reached the girl's room, where she lay behind a glass window, her small frame dwarfed by tubes and monitors. Siobhan, her name, meant freedom, though she was bound to that bed. Her eyes, green and bright despite the pain, lit up when she saw the doll. Father Thomas held it up to the glass, and her smile, weak but radiant, cracked something open in his chest. He set the doll on a table inside her room, then handed one walkie-talkie to her nurse, and the other to her brother, Liam, who stood outside, his own face pale with worry. Siobhan's voice, faint but clear, came through the walkie-talkie later that night. Liam, it's me, she said, her giggle like a bell in the sterile silence. I've got my doll, and now I've got you. Liam pressed the button, his voice trembling. I'm right here, Siobhan. Always. Father Thomas stood back, watching through the glass as the twins talked, their voices bridging the distance the disease had forced between them. The doll sat on Siobhan's bed, its yarn hair catching the dim light, a small symbol of a wish fulfilled. Weeks passed, and the hospital grew quieter still. Siobhan's strength faded, her laughter replaced by shallow breaths. Father Thomas was there the night she slipped away, holding her mother's hand as she wept. Liam stood outside, clutching the walkie-talkie, whispering to a sister who could no longer answer. The doll stayed on the bed, a silent witness to her final days. Father Thomas carried the weight of that loss, as he had so many others, but he didn't break. He returned to the church, to the ward, to the endless cycle of hope and grief. Months later, a letter arrived, written in a careful, trembling hand. It was from Siobhan's mother, sent from a small town in Ireland. Father, it read, you gave my girl a gift no medicine could match. That doll, those walkie-talkies, they brought her back to us, even for a little while. They were the best medicine she ever had. Father Thomas read the letter alone in his small office, the words blurring as his eyes filled. He folded it carefully and slipped it into a worn folder he called his Sunshine File, where he kept the stories that reminded him why he kept going. The Whitmans never asked for thanks, never sought recognition. They attended Mass as always, their faces softer now, as if that Christmas had changed them too. The church was quiet again the following December, the Advent wreath glowing once more. Mrs. Callahan knelt in her usual pew, her rosary beads clicking softly. Daniel lit another candle, his mother's health improving, his prayers lighter. Father Thomas stood near the altar, his cassock still worn at the cuffs, his heart still heavy but full. He thought of Siobhan, of her smile, of the walkie-talkies static carrying her voice. And he thought of the Whitmans, who'd learned that wealth could buy a doll, but only love could make it matter. The snow fell outside, blanketing the city in silence, and for a moment, the world felt whole. This story, inspired by a true event, has been fictionalized to spark reflection and empathy. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs a little light this Christmas. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters.